Hello and welcome to Move Face Designs. Hopefully in this video I am going to show you how to start your pattern, move through the pattern and then finish and end up with a beautiful work of art that you can be proud of. So the first thing you need to do is go to my website movefacedesignz.co.uk, choose yourself a pattern, pay for it and download it. Once it's downloaded you will be able to print it out. Your pattern will have in it a fabric placement guide. It will have a value guide, which will be just a black and white picture of the fabric placement guide, and it will also have a photograph of my finished collage. It will then also give you your pattern pieces. So what I like to do is just print out the pattern pieces, and the reason for this is it saves ink. So essentially it's saving me money, but more than that, I'll show you. Here it is on my iPad, and this is how I like to work. And what that means is there's my guide there that I'll be working from and that you will be working from, and if there's a piece on there that I can't really see that clearly, I can just zoom into it. Whereas if it's on a piece of paper or on photographic paper, it's just a little bit more difficult, and I suppose it depends on the quality of your printer as well as to what type of print you're going to get. So this is just much easier. That's how I do it. So you've downloaded, you've printed off your pattern pieces. This particular one comes in 4 pieces of paper, 4 A4. Now each slice of paper, the way I have designed the pattern, has a very small border around the side of the pattern, and this one will actually sit over the top, so there's a small margin where the pattern is repeated. So what you need to do is you need to offer up your piece of paper and you need to just play around with it until you get it right of how the actual pattern is going to sit over the top. Now I think the best thing to do is to take your time with this and make sure that everything lines up properly, because if you don't do that, what will happen is this won't be sitting quite right. So when you add your next couple of pieces of paper, they just won't line up at all. And so it's really important that you get that right, so that when you are working across your pattern is how it should be. So once you've lined it up, then just stick it with some sellotape. Now I use a sellotape that you can write over. It just makes it easier if you need to draw over one of your shapes. You can use ordinary sellotape, it's entirely up to you, but that's the particular type I use. So you've done that, then you need to do the same for the other couple of pieces. Cut this all the way along there and then stick that to the other piece. So that's your pattern all sorted and ready to go. And when you look at it in just lines, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not until you start putting it together that you actually start seeing it appear on the page, which is really quite exciting. So the next thing you do is you get some parchment paper, and what you do with that is you place it over the top of your design. Parchment paper, I found, if you get the commercial stuff, catering, it comes in slightly wider versions, up to I think about 500 millimeters. So for instance, some designs you can just have one piece of paper and you'll have no overlap on it. Obviously if it's slightly wider you're going to have an overlap, and this is why I was talking about using sellotape that you can write on when you join your patterns. If you have got an overlap, it becomes a little bit more difficult to see the pattern underneath. You can do it and it's not a problem. And what that just means is you can lift up your piece of parchment paper and you can then draw around your shape so that when you put your parchment paper down, you can see it a lot clearer. Okay, so we've got our parchment paper all set up, and then I like to work from an easel. And the reason I like to work from an easel is so that I can see my design as I would actually be looking at it. You might decide that you like to work flat on the desk, and that's fine, you can work flat on the desk, If you wanted to take a look at it, the best thing to do is to take a photograph with your phone and then have a look and see how your progress is going. One other tip as well, if you think that a piece of fabric doesn't actually look right where it is, then change your photograph to black and white. You can then have a look at the value guide that is in your pattern, and then you can see whether it is the right tone to go there. So we've done all that, we're ready. So what we need to do then is prepare our fabric. There are numerous types of sticky stuff, if you like, that will go on the back of your fabric. There is Bonder Web, Steamer Seam, Misty Fuse, Heat and Bond. The lists go on and on. I like to use Bonder Web. I find that the nicest for me. It produces a pattern that's not too stiff, and also it doesn't gum my needles up when I'm quilting or thread painting it. It's just a case of trial and error. I'm sure you will find one that you much prefer to use. So you take your, in my case, Bonder Web, and I attach it to the back of my fabric. Now, all I would say is whatever you're going to use, make sure you follow the manufacturer's instructions on how to apply it, because each and every one of them is different. And if you apply it the way, say, that Bonder Web should be applied to, say, Steamer Seam, then you might get varying results with it. So just pay attention to that. So now you've attached it to your fabric. I've pulled this bit off, so it's flapping about a bit, but basically it's stuck to it. What you do is you pull back this piece, and your sticky stuff is now on the back of your fabric. So this piece here will mostly get discarded, but I like to use it in my method to help me. So basically I'm going to do this piece here, and my pattern states that it should be sort of like a pinky brown. So I've decided that this is the fabric I'm going to use. It's quite nice to have quite a lot of patterns of fabric. Don't be afraid though to use plain fabric. Plain fabrics come in absolutely every shade. So if you can't find the right shade in your patterned palette, you will most definitely be able to find that colour that you need in a plain. I wouldn't do the whole of my collage in plain fabric. I think that the more pattern you've got, the actual nicer it looks. It just gives it more texture. And a lot of the time you can use the patterns to say what you need to say about your design. So for instance, you might find one that would look like, say, the centre of a flower, or you might find one that will suggest fur better. So definitely patterns really do have their place. But like I say, don't be afraid to use plain. As you can see, I've got quite a few here. So this is my pinky brown, and this is where the pattern tells me to do it. So you peel off your back piece like this, and what I like to do, see, look, now look, that is stuck there, and it's not stuck to my fabric. So it's just a case of getting your thumb underneath it, just gently. Now it is. Okay, so it's not stuck to the back. So I'm going to draw around my shape. Now, a couple of suggestions. When you get to the bit where there's material, just draw around a little bit, because what's going to happen is this piece of fabric will slide underneath this piece of fabric, so that where it has the overlap, that's where it will stick together. When it sticks together, it will move as a whole piece. As you can see, all my pieces underneath are stuck together. Now, also, when you're drawing your shape, what you need to do is make sure that you're drawing it, so you're folding your fabric back and you're doing it on this side of the paper. Don't fold your fabric back and turn it over that way, because it'll come out back to front when you turn it over and cut it out, and then it's not going to fit your shape and you will have wasted a piece of fabric. So always make sure it's done that side. Now, as you can see, that there you can see quite clearly through there, so you can go ahead and cut that shape out. However, if it is a dark piece of fabric, and I'll show you with this piece, I have drawn round a shape here, but when I go to cut it out, I can't really see it properly. So what you need to do with that is pop a piece of paper in between like that, which will then show you your pattern, and then draw around it. So I'll just do this quickly as an exercise. I don't actually need this piece at the minute. So now you can see it quite clear enough to cut it out. Now the thing is, if I try to cut that out, that's going to move about quite a lot. So what I like to do is I like to just put a little bit of heat on it again and stick it down. So that means now my piece of fabric isn't moving about, and I can cut it out exactly how I want to. Now, quite a few people, all they do is they just take their piece of parchment paper and they'll draw around the shape, and then they'll just put that shape on their fabric like that, and then they'll cut around it. Now that's great if you can do that, but what happens with me is, especially if it's a small piece, it all moves around all over the place, so I can never get the right shape that I need. So that is why I do it the way I do it. It does take a little bit longer, but luckily when you're doing lighter colours, it's just literally a case of drawing around it and cutting it out. And again, you see now this is flapping about, so what I would do is just stick it down just quickly. It doesn't need loads, so that I can cut it out with it holding it fairly still. What I also do is I always put a piece of parchment paper between my fabric either side and my iron. My iron gets really quite dirty. If I was to do it on a dark piece like this with the pencil line, that pencil line transfers onto there. So then if I'm using a plain piece of fabric and I put it on my collage and I iron, that pencil that is on there is going to end up on there. So by doing that, and I do that every single time, and I am certain that that's helped me to keep my collages nice and clean, and it all becomes a habit to do that. So we cut out our shape, and I use Frisco scissors. Again, there are lots of different scissors on the market. I know a lot of collagers use K. Buckley scissors. I've never actually used those, but I've heard that they are extremely good. I like to use these because they've got a nice spring on them. They're, they don't give me blisters, and also it doesn't make my hands hurt. So we cut out the shape, and I like to use tweezers. And the reason I like tweezers is I haven't got any nails, not to speak of. So it just helps me to unstick the piece like that. Discard that piece of paper. And then this also helps me to place this. As you can see, I've pulled this off. So it's moving around all over the place. So I can set up my piece there that I need, make sure that's in the right position over the top of it. Again, remember I use my parchment paper. Just make sure that it's not moving about. And then my parchment paper holds it in place, and then I stick it down. Now, if you'll see now that is now stuck to that piece there, so I can pull it all off in one piece. If you are new at this and you're really not quite sure that is the right piece of fabric to go in there, what I did when I first started was use one of these, and basically it's just a very small iron. So what I do then is I would just heat this bit here, obviously with my parchment paper, but I would heat that just about there, just a little bit there, and then that means that that's not stuck there. and it means I can step back and I can have a look at it and decide whether I like it there or not. You don't even have to worry about too much, well, how can I do my next piece? You can still do your next piece, even if it's not stuck down properly. So I'll unstick it so we can see that, you know, perhaps it's just stuck there. So I would then do the same thing, cut my piece of fabric exactly the same as I've just shown you before, making sure that I've drawn, because it's a dark piece, on that piece, and I've stuck it down, I've cut it out, and then I've removed the back piece. So what I do is I will offer that up under there. If you remember, I've cut it a little bit bigger so that it will actually sit underneath there, and that fabric will now cover over that and make it all one piece. But if I don't want to make it all one piece, again, I can just tack down the bottom piece of it. So now, or you can still step back and you can have a look at that and you can decide whether you like that or not, but nothing is permanent. I can remove that if I want to with no problem at all. There you go. So if you're not that confident or you're not sure about a piece of fabric, then that's the way to do it, because if you stick it, and I'm quite happy that that's what I want, but if I did that, it all then becomes really quite difficult to separate. It can be done, but let me tell you, I've done it a few times and it's so much easier to do it that way first, and it doesn't spoil your joins, because sometimes if you're trying to separate it, it really will pull at the fabric or whatever, and you end up spoiling that piece. So that's just a good tip. So now you've done that, and you just carry on building up and building up your fabric onto your pattern until it's completed. And like I said, eventually you will gently be able to take it and pull it all off on one piece. If you wanted to do a collage background, you could work it here and then take it off as one big piece, or you could just slip that off, do your background, and then place that on the background afterwards. Just one other thing that I forgot to mention. So say for instance we cut a shape and we have, I'm just going to do this one, it's not the right colour. What should we do? We use a darker piece just so I can show you what I mean. So we're just assuming that this is the right shape that goes under here. But say for instance we do that, but for some reason we've cut it slightly wrong, and then there's a bit of a gap there and there. You say, oh, what am I going to do now? Got to cut another piece. No, you don't. What you can do is you can just take another piece of fabric and you can just slide it underneath into that gap, and then continue on your way. Stick it down and it doesn't notice. And furthermore, if you take this off and put it on your background, say I was to put this on, I don't know, let's say a light background for instance, and you could see some of that light background through my, it doesn't matter. Before you stick it down, then you can just slide a piece of fabric underneath it. It's much better if you spot it while it's on the parchment paper, because you can do it a whole lot easier. Once it's stuck down on your backing fabric, it really is quite difficult to hide, but you can do it with thread when you're doing your quilting and thread painting. So there's always little ways of improving things if you've made a little boo-boo along the way. So I think that's everything. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's explained very clearly how you do your fabric collage, and I hope that you enjoy taking up a new hobby. Until next time, when I'll see you again. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.